Good. Thanks for having me on.
So I'm I was introduced to you, I guess again by Sid, who I had on recently, who's driving a motorcycle across the US and hitting as many Bitcoin meetups as he can. And it was there that I saw that I think we interacted. You sent me a message on Twitter before, but basically he was like, you got to talk to this guy. And then he hit us up again. And well, maybe I'll get you to introduce yourself and your backstory, and then we can get into all the juicy details that I know myself and many others are increasingly interested in these days.
Sure. Yeah. My name's Karl. I've been doing this homestead permaculture thing for a number of years now. It all started back when I found out about this housing style called Earthships, and I ended up doing an apprenticeship out in New Mexico with Michael Reynolds, building one of those things, and found out about permaculture there. And I went on this long journey of ending up. I used to think that homesteading or the Earthship was gonna, if I could build this self-sustainable house, that it would take care of me, and I could if I took care of it. But yeah, it led me into this homesteading thing, which I've been doing now, and it's been quite the adventure, to say the least.
So you come from a background in film, right? I think you said you were working in reality TV / documentaries, and then you came across this concept of what is an Earthship? Like, what, before we get into what you've kind of been up to, what is an Earthship and why were you interested in the first place?
So an Earthship is it's a fully self-sustaining home, passive solar design. The idea is that, if, like, when you're sailing across the ocean in a ship, you need everything. You need to take everything with you to survive. And so this idea of an Earthship is that you build a home on the earth that it's self-contained with everything you need to survive. So you catch water off the roof. You heat and cool passively with the sun. You produce power with solar panels or wind. The front of the house has a greenhouse in it, so you're growing some of your own nutrition there. And you recycle the water many times. So the water comes in off the roof, you drink it, you filter it, and then you drink it, and then it goes down the drain. You flush the toilets with it, and then it goes out into the front of the house and waters your fruit trees, your plants out there. And so that was an incredibly attractive idea to me, that you could just build this thing, and as long as you maintained its operation, then it was going to maintain your sustenance as well.
And tell me about how you went from that to what you're currently doing. Like, did it not pan out the way you thought it would? Was that not a sustainable model? Like, how did you wind up from an interest in that to what you're doing now?
Well, when I was there apprenticing, that's when I first heard about permaculture. And I thought, I had no idea how much it took to really produce your own, like how much food, like how much work it took, or how much it took to produce a lot of your own food. I was thinking, oh, the greenhouse, you can just grow, all the stuff you need in there. But really, that's not the case. You need quite a bit more space than that. And so I was living in Los Angeles. I was I was experimenting with these bottle gardens in the window, growing microgreens, had a worm bin, just trying to do whatever I could to explore some of these ideas of permaculture and producing your own stuff. And when I was there, I wanted to build one of these Earthships. I was talking to architects and stuff, and there was just too much red tape and permitting process. There's these mountainside lots that were like $15,000, for a little quarter acre. And so I was like, oh, I could save up and get one of those, and then I'll just blink away at building this house myself. The house is built, Earthships are built with rammed earth tires. So you just basically pound dirt into a tire with a sledgehammer and stack it like bricks. And I thought, oh, I could blink away at this. All I need to do is buy the land. So I was talking to an architect. Well, what do I need to do in order to be allowed to do this? And well, you need to build an improved road up to the structure. You need to have the power lines run, even though I want to be off grid. You have to have a sewer system there. All this stuff that now a $15,000 lot on the mountainside that nobody else wants is like $250,000 or more, after you have to jump through all the hoops just to get the permit to start building. So I said, forget that. I can't. There's just no way to make it possible. And I started looking for properties to just with a little bit more lax regulations. like where I'm at now, it's agriculturally zoned. So there's a lot of gray area in the zoning. I can kind of do whatever I want with the buildings.
Are you public with where you are now,
I'm,
state-wise, or?
yeah, I'm in Michigan. I go to the Benton Harbor Bitcoin meetup. Uh, that's really how all this, how I got it connected into the deeper levels of the Bitcoin communities through the meetups. I after going to them, I'm like, man, everybody, if they're into Bitcoin, you need to find your local Bitcoin meetup and start connecting with everybody, because this is how we're going to do it.
Yeah. What was it in the first place that led you from being in film to this Earthship thing?
So I think that like film, I was like, I went to film school. I had this, they teach you in school, that, oh, filmmaking is like this universal language. It's a really powerful way to change the world. And so I was working in documentary style TV in Chicago, reality TV and stuff like that. And what I thought was a good thing ended up, I learned, the more I worked in the industry, I realized that, man, these people are just trying to manipulate and bend the story, just to get the ratings or to get the show deal signed and everything. And it just really wasn't ethically lining up with what I wanted to do. This opportunity I've been interested in this Earthship idea, just, dreaming about it, reading about it. I bought the books, read through the books on how to build them and stuff. But then I just went on the Earthship website one day and I saw that there was an opening for an apprenticeship. And when I say apprenticeship, they make you pay $100 just to prove that you're going to show up, and you basically bring a tent and camp at the build site, and you get to learn, you just work side by side with everybody learning how to build this house. And so I just said, screw it. I quit my job and took the dive in, just went to New Mexico from Chicago and went for it. And you meet a lot of crazy people along the way, that, one thing leads to another, but.
Right. Yeah. And so you leave California. It was California, right? Where this parcel of land was on offer, and you wind up in Michigan, and tell me how the story develops from there.
Yeah. While I was getting discouraged by the fact that I couldn't build this Earthship in LA, I said, well, what do I want? What do I really need? What's an ideal property look like based on the studying that I've been doing in permaculture. And so my parents had lived in this area, and I sort of sent my mom this list. I was like, hey, if you see any properties for sale, let me know. This is kind of what I'm looking for. And she ended up finding something on Craigslist, and we got in touch with the owners, and just the price was too high, way too much, way out of my league. But I just, said, okay, cool. A year went by. They were still there. The listing was still on Craigslist. This listing was on Craigslist with no action for like years. And so eventually I just said, hey, I'm going to come. I want to meet you people. I want to come. This is like the perfect property. And basically that after meeting with them, they said that, well, I couldn't afford it. So I had to ask for owner financing. That was my only way I couldn't get a traditional loan to buy the house. I just couldn't qualify. And so I had to be like, hey, I've got this much money. I think I can make this much over the year working remotely. You have to kind of trust me here, but I think that this is the place for me. And they said that, well, they agreed to it. And I worked my ass off for a year, just paying them off. And that allowed me to prove that I had enough equity in the house or whatever, as I was remodeling it, to then refinance with a traditional mortgage. And now I own the house in a regular way. But yeah, it was just kind of the serendipitous thing. They said that God told them that I was meant to own this property that was going to take care of me and my family. It was everyone was crying. It was a very emotional deal when we finally struck it.
Interesting. What did you make of that comment at the time?
Well, I was very grateful for their perspective on that, because in my mind, I was just laser focused on trying to get started doing this stuff. Just having the opportunity, the property just was pretty much exactly what I was looking for. So yeah, I at the time I was just like, cool. I didn't really believe in God. I wasn't following a religion per se or anything like that. But I definitely didn't laugh them away. I wasn't like laughing at them about this idea. the neighbors, they always said that these people were, I don't know what kind of Christianity they follow, but they were always like holding hands. Like they said one time there was a tree that was, they were getting cut down on the property line, and if the tree fell the wrong way, it was going to fall in the neighbor's house. And they said they were holding hands next to the guy with the chainsaw, chanting and stuff. So they were pretty extreme in their practice of this form of Christianity.
Right.
And there was a problem where there was still a lien on the house when I recently refinanced, and I had to call the woman to get this worked out, and she was even still just talking very extremely about the way that God is guiding us all and things like that. So
Interesting. So you get the property. What next? How do you, because, and I'll preface this by saying, and I'm sure it's no surprise to you, but there seems to be an interest amongst Bitcoiners, myself included, to being more sovereign, to being less dependent on all the different systems of food and energy and sustenance that exist in the world today. And notwithstanding that it's great to have such conveniences, but I think many of us are increasingly focused on minimizing the degree to which we're dependent on such things. And, having your own homestead where you have you raise or grow your own food, and you have access to your own water, and you have access to your own energy, is something that I think really appeals to us. So you seem to have started with a blank slate. And so how do you get something like that rolling?
Well, I had recently, before I got to the property, I took this road trip across the Southwest and south all the way down to Key West from LA, kind of as my, see you later, LA. I call them like mini retirements. I read that book, the 4-Hour Work Week. And so I throughout my life, I'd always just saved up a bunch of money and then quit whatever job I had, and then took one of these long road trips for months. And so that was like between LA and coming to the house, I took this long road trip, and I was staying at, I had just discovered Airbnb at the time. So I was staying at all these weird Airbnbs, a bus, and it was my stay at this bus in New Orleans that got me thinking, like, all I need to do is figure out a way to monetize the house so that the house can pay like bootstrap the farm. And so the first thing I did when I moved in is I started renovating the house to have 2 units. The main level is what I was renovating to rent on Airbnb. And the lower level, I insulated the crap out of it and just tried to make it a little bunker for me to live in that was hyper efficient. So in the wintertime, it's cold here in Michigan. I have this nice little bubble that I can live in and not have to heat the whole big area of the house upstairs when the guests aren't coming through. And so, yeah, I just started off by really tearing the house apart and making it as efficient as possible and creating this idea of the Airbnb business model. And then once I realized that the Airbnb thing was working, I was like, well, I can build a tiny house. I could go find a yurt. I can build this other stuff, get as many little dwellings out here as possible to push this ecotourism thing.
You look like you're in a yurt right now. Is that right?
Yeah. I'm in the yurt. I bought this yurt on eBay used. I took it down in the middle of winter. I thought, oh, it's a tent. You should be able to just, I showed up with like a little toolbox and a trailer. It was in Illinois, and I thought, oh, I'll take it down in a day and drive it home, and it'll be no problem. Well, the people built this thing not to be taken apart. It took me like 4 days, and I had to call my brother in for help. It was like 18 degrees outside, and I did not have nearly what I needed to do it. But finally, after a few years of plinking away at it, I finally got this thing up, and it's on Airbnb now. We just had guests check out last Sunday.
Nice.
And Sid stayed in it too, actually. I think he enjoyed it.
Sweet. All right. So tell me about building the homestead. Tell me about the food and the animals and all that shit. Break into it.
Yeah. So I got a little criticism from people because I was working remotely, doing this editing thing. That was my main thing, is post-production. So I was trying to work remotely as much as possible while the Airbnb, while I was renovating the house and everything. But at the same time, I was trying to like practice this permaculture stuff. I was digging what I thought were, my idea of swales, and I built this hugelkultur mound, and I was just trying to plant my perennial or my annual vegetables. And anyway, I didn't know what I was doing. I just started doing stuff. And over time, enough failures, you learn something though each time. Okay, well, you can't just dig a trench and throw the seeds on the ground and hope something grows. You have to. There's a reason why people are doing things the way they do them over time. And so, I started off just getting annual vegetables going. Then I got chickens. My wife now, I had met her pretty early on, and she was really pushing for the animals. Like I was kind of like, man, animals sound like a lot of work. I don't want to really mess with that. We got our hands full with all this other stuff, just wrapping our arms around the property in general, clearing out old trees, just getting the place back up to what the pastures needed mowing. I needed to find a tractor, all these kind of things.
How big is the property?
It's 20 acres. So if I were to start over, I'd start smaller. 20 acres has been, I still really haven't gotten really all under control. But we're utilizing it as best we can. I mean, there's more stuff that we can take advantage of here than we can have time to do. But so yeah, just one thing, you start with chickens. We learned a little bit about how to, get the chickens going. We had some egg production. Okay, cool. We're getting our own eggs. Then it's like, well, maybe we should start doing broiler chickens and try and grow some chickens for meat. And then there was this opportunity to get these sheep. So we got 3 sheep. They were all bred. They were pregnant when we bought them. Then they gave birth to twins each. And then it ended up being half females, half males. So then we butchered the 3 males. We took them. The closest USDA butcher is like over an hour away from us, which is really unfortunate. But we had to throw them in the back of our Subaru, our pickup truck, to take them to the butcher. And then we found somebody with a ram. We bred our, the 6 females that we had left. The next year we had more sheep. Did the same thing. Kept the females, ate the males, and to the point now where we have 60 sheep. We decided at some point that getting draft horses would be a good idea. For a while, I worked at a nursery just to learn how to do plant propagation. This guy was down the road. He had a very intriguing list of heirloom fruit trees. And I went over there just trying to ask questions. And he's like, hey, you sound really interesting. You should just work for me. And I was like, oh, okay, sure. So I spent 4 hours a few times a day or a few days a week working with him. He taught me how to graft. He taught me all the ins and outs of plant propagation, making softwood cuttings, hardwood cuttings, so on and so forth. So then I started doing grafting these fruit trees and focusing on the perennial vegetables. Every year we buy a few more different, whether it's hops, grapes, berry plants. We're just constantly planting stuff, developing out our food forest. And it's amazing. It's been 7 years now. At the beginning we had nothing, and now all of a sudden it's like there's just crap growing around us everywhere, and we're having to sell stuff. We have too much abundance. We have to get rid of it. So I'm going on and on all over the place, but there's a lot to it. And it's the key thing is just figure out kind of what you like, what you want, and just start trying stuff, and read books for sure. Read books on it. That's been incredibly helpful.
Well, don't worry about going on, because I want to hear about all this stuff. But was the lifestyle what you expected? Are you happy with this lifestyle? I mean, it sounds like a lot of work, but I can also see how it might be very satisfying or gratifying, a feeling of independence and sovereignty that few people probably get to experience. Like, how do you feel about the lifestyle that it's delivered to you on a day-to-day basis?
My wife and I joke a lot, because we're always like, this is the year that we're going to turn the corner and we're going to be, we're going to really be doing it now. And it's just, you slowly, one step at a time, are sort of walking away from traditional society, to the point where now we look back and we're like, wow, the life that we're living is just, it's unrecognizable to where we started. Living in cities, I lived in Chicago and LA, and I hardly knew how to, it could hardly even use tools, it's, so it just takes, it just slowly catches up to you, I guess, this idea of sovereignty, until you build the skill sets one step at a time. And all of a sudden it's like, wow, I know how to do all this stuff that I never knew how to do before, just because I needed to figure it out, because I couldn't afford to pay somebody else to do it for me.
Is it a lot of work?
Well,
this point?
physically, it's physically demanding. I could say that. I probably walk between 6 and 7 miles a day in the summertime when things are really moving, when we're moving the sheep, and a lot of the times I'm carrying something while I'm walking too. Now we could get one of those golf carts or gators, a lot of four-wheeler to get around, but I just enjoy. I was a wrestler, a cross-country runner. I enjoy to feeling my muscles burn and feeling tired at the end of the day from having done physical exertion. So in that regard, you have to be, well, you don't have to be. There's a way to do it if you don't like physical work. But for the way I'm doing it, yeah, it's very physically demanding.
Yeah, that resonates with me a lot, because I actually, at some point in the future, I can't wait for those days where you're out under the sun all day and you're carrying things around and you're moving things and your hands are dirty and you're sweating your ass off. And then you come back at the end of the day and however you unwind, like a beer, a
Right.
joint, just a big glass of coconut water or whatever, and sit back and
All of it.
feel a
Yeah.
sense of accomplishment,
It's very rewarding. And I mean, sometimes bad things happen too, though, that it's just nature. We had
Mm.
we paid $600 for this ram, registered Katahdin ram. So if we were to breed it with our sheep, that increases the value of the stock because they're provably uh, genetically sound. They're
Mm-hmm.
provably this breed. And so we had it in the winter. It did successfully breed a few of the sheep, but it ended up hanging itself on the hay feeder that we had. Somehow it got its head through and slipped. Its foot slipped, and we walked out one day and it was just hanging there dead. And it was a pretty financial loss and terrible to see this animal go, and didn't know what to do with it. The ground was all frozen. It was frozen solid. It's like, man, how do we even bury this thing?
Yeah.
So there's definitely this aspect of just stuff happens all the time that does negatively affect your attitude. You just feel like, man, are we doing the right thing? Is this profitable? Is it? Sometimes if we haven't been the best at keeping records and notes on how much money we're spending on feed and things like that, and so sometimes we're not quite sure if what we're doing even makes financial sense. But at the end of the day, it's when you crack into that freezer and you pull out a lamb steak and you cook it for dinner, and then you have like garlic scapes from the garden, and you finish it off with some strawberry jam on a piece of toast or whatever. It's like you realize, wow, this ain't bad, and drinking
Nothing
homebrewed
tastes better.
beer, and we make our own beer, all kinds of stuff that. So all of a sudden it's like, wow, a lot of the stuff that we're eating, consuming, and using are stuff that we made, and we had a direct hand in. We know exactly what went into it.
Yeah. I'm sure you've seen this film, but The Biggest Little Farm,
Mm.
your
Mm-hmm.
your experience reminds me of that film, because they started off wanting to do something similar, or maybe they even wanted to do like a monoculture or monocrop sort of thing. And then they were advised by this somewhat eccentric permaculture guy to like, no, you got to just have as much diversity as possible. And then they run into all these problems where 50% of their yield is being eaten by rodents and pests and stuff like that. And, the natural response is to try to control them and kill them. But the guy was like, nope, you just got to let it find its level and, keep introducing diversity and let the ecosystem find an equilibrium that works for all constituents of that ecosystem. And, of course, the film ends where it's a very like a successful venture, and it's a very seemingly like a very lovely operation that they have going. And it kind of sounds like that's the journey that you're on. How do you determine what direction to take this? What animals to introduce, what plants, how do you make those decisions?
So now the property is kind of telling us what to do. And as we graze the sheep, as we move them over each pasture, you notice different weeds that are popping up, certain grasses taking over. For example, every year we plow up about 2 acres and plant turnips to feed the sheep over the wintertime. But how do we make the decision on where to plant, which field to plant the turnips in? Well, this year we're going to plant the turnips in the field that's being taken over by the sedge grass that the sheep don't want to eat. So that'll give us a chance to replant that pasture with something more productive, so the sheep will have better food in the spring. And so, and then another example is like, we've got this rabbit colony. It's about, I don't know, 2,500 square foot. I don't know. It's a small area fenced in with rabbits in there, just breeding naturally. And so what we do is we clip a bunch of tree branches and pull weeds and throw it in there to feed them. Well, I had these apple rootstocks, these seedling rootstocks that had gotten away from me. I didn't get a chance to graft them. They had gotten too large for the way that I know how to graft with them. And I couldn't dig them up. I ran out of time to dig them up and sell them. So what did I start doing? I walked past them 100 times thinking, what do I do with these trees? I don't want to just dig them up and throw them away. So then it was right next to the rabbit colony. I was like, rabbits eat the apple, apple prunings. Why don't I just start hacking away at these trees? It's free food for the rabbits. And if I kill the trees, at least I've done something. I've grown rabbit meat with it instead of just using my effort to just get them out of my way. There's a lot of examples like that as you pay more attention to what's going on, you just come up with these solutions for how to utilize the property. Another example is we've got our horses, the draft horses are in a track that goes through about 2 acres of woods. We don't want the horses out on the pasture because the pasture is what we use to grow our sheep, grow the lamb meat. And so we feed the horses hay mainly because they actually they're what's called easy keepers. These are halflinger horses. And if they eat too much grass, they develop a condition called founder, which is dangerous for them. And so we keep them on this track through the woods so they can run and get exercise. We're not sacrificing any of our pasture, and we're feeding them hay. Well, there's a big area in the center of the track that was it was sugar maple trees. I tapped the trees to make maple syrup. We had that area logged to clear out some of the weed trees, tulip poplars, cottonwoods, stuff that was hindering the growth of the maples. After we did that, all of this undergrowth was starting to grow up, new sassafras saplings and multiflora rose and all this crap that was getting in my way and making it hard for me to harvest the maple sap. And so we decided, well, we've already got a fence going around the area. Why don't we put our rams in there for the summertime? That way we keep them separate from our flock of sheep. They don't breed out of, they don't breed them when we don't want to. They've got all this free food in the saplings of the trees. And then our stand of maple trees is clear in the winter for me to then go tap the trees and harvest the syrup or the sap. So all these integrations and connections just reveal themselves more and more as you start utilizing different areas of the property.
That's so fucking cool. Do you have any cattle, like beef?
No, I don't really know too much about what the specific requirements are for cattle. I certainly know the reason why we got sheep is because I can pick the carcass up with my hand. I could it weighs about as much as I do. A big ewe or lamb, they're about 120 pounds at the largest at the end of the season when we start butchering them. So we don't need anything special to work with the sheep. I can butcher them with just basic small, there's no special equipment. Now I don't really know necessarily.
You butcher them now?
I do. Last year we took 7 ram lambs to a butcher, thinking that, okay, we'll just have them butcher it all, save me some time, because I'm not the best. I'm not the best at it. I can cut it into cuts that are edible, but not saleable. You know what I mean? They're not pretty. And so we took them to a butcher, and we learned the hard way in that instance that there's something called the butcher's share, where these people, when I butcher the sheep, we get almost all the meat, all the bones, everything. We get to keep it all. Well, what we got back from the butcher was like maybe 30% less than what we expected. We called him and we said, hey, there should be another bag of ground or something. We're missing some meat here. Where's all the meat from these animals? We took, it was just unbelievable how much was missing. It seemed like was gone. And it was just due to the inefficiency of they're not trying to eke out every last little piece of meat. They're trying to get this thing cut up and out the door so they can get the next animal in. And so we lost a lot of meat that way. So now I will butcher our own every year just to be sure that we get enough for us. Now I can't sell that stuff, so because of the rules. So we will take the animals that we do sell to a butcher, not that butcher. We're going to try a different one, but it's hard to find a butcher.
You can give away can you like trade and barter what you butcher yourself, like with other people in the area?
Yeah. And I do trade lamb per hay for our horses. And we do feed the sheep a bunch of hay over the winter as well. It's a neighbor down the road. He was selling these big round bales of hay to us for a certain price. And I thought it was expensive, but it was convenient because he's local, right? We've gone through all kinds of different driving here, driving there, renting trailers, getting this just to get the hay here. And so it was very nice that he would come and deliver it. And eventually I was just kind of like, hey, would you take some lamb and lower the cost of the hay? And he thought that idea was great. And I brought him a lamb at the end of the fall last year, and they loved it. And so then I was like, well, do you want two and lower the price even more? And so it seems like more and more I can give him more and more lamb up to a certain point in exchange for this hay.
Right. I'm assuming prior to doing this, you hadn't butchered a lamb before?
No, I got a book. It really.
What was that like the first time you did it?
Dispatching it, is because I'm not even a person that has handled guns that often. Maybe shoot some skeet here or there, go to the range with people once a year.
No hunting or anything before this.
No. And so I get this rush of adrenaline, and there's this pressure to make sure the shot's good. And I've botched it a couple times where I've had to shoot it twice. You aim for a certain spot, and sometimes you miss and it comes out the throat, and they're running around and blood shooting out. And then you got to quickly make a decision on try and shoot it again so it goes down. And because the shot, it really is just to stun it. It doesn't necessarily kill it right away. Once you shoot it, then you come in and you cut the throat to let the animal bleed. So yeah, it's definitely it was hard at
difficult?
first.
Yeah.
And we started with chickens. I mean, that was the first animal that we did for meat, was the chicken. And the chickens flop around, and when you're not ready for it, the blood is flying all over the place, and you feel the warmth of it on your skin. And it's definitely an interesting, you just like kind of think to yourself, all right, I thank you for your sacrifice, sacrificing your life to feed me. But it's not something I like to do. I'll put it that way.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you, like how reconcile might be the wrong word, but how do you find that you allow yourself to approach that aspect of things optimally? Because, I've shared this before. I've only been hunting once, right? And I'm a big meat eater, right? And I don't like being a hypocrite. And so I wanted to have the experience of taking the life for myself. So I'm not so detached from it. And I just go to the grocery store and see a nice steak, or even get it from, my local meat guy who delivers it and raises them ethically and all that stuff. But I still didn't like the detachment from the nitty gritty process of actually it winding up on my plate. And I wanted to be involved in that. And even though on that particular hunting trip, because we were 3 days out and we still hadn't found anything, by the time one was spotted, a more experienced hand took the ultimate shot. I was right next to him. And I went up to the animal afterwards and just internally made my peace with it effectively. Because, and I can imagine in your sort of scenario, like when you're with these animals every day, you end up noticing patterns. You probably end up noticing certain personalities. You end up developing some kind of a relationship with them. And you probably really enjoy that. I know that I would, because, it's another sentient being. It's another expression of life. And there's a lot good wrapped up in that. And, so I'm always interested in how, and I don't like because a lot of people might just be like, I don't give a fuck, it's an animal, I killed it. Like, that's not an approach or a perspective that I really appreciate or get much from. Like, I like to hear how people bridge the gap between, reconcile that tension. And so if you had any particular thoughts on that, I'd love to hear them.
Well, I don't know if you've heard, I mean, there's a practice of people pray over their food. And so I do think that there's more to life, or we do express these subtle energies. And so, and I think that's why you get this adrenaline and this hyper focus when you do have to dispatch the animal. It's your way of, like you said, reconciling that those subtle energies. If you have anger and you just want to kill that fucker, sometimes some of the sheep, the ones there's bad ones, that always get out, and I do have those thoughts like, man, I just can't wait to get that one in the freezer because they're an asshole. But when it comes down to it, if you can create that energy of gratitude and project that onto the animal, it certainly can't hurt anything. Make that, I believe it produces a better meat at the end of the day.
And has being involved in this process influenced you as a person at all in terms of, well, whatever, gratitude or appreciation for, or understanding or perspective on nature and life and any of that kind of stuff? Has being confronted with, the reality of it all influenced you in any way?
Yeah, I mean, so like I said, when I bought the property, I wasn't really religious at the time. I didn't really think too much about it, to be honest. I was just more focused on the nuts and bolts of life. And now being so connected in to the production and creation of my own sustenance, and watching the things grow and everything reproduce and multiply, you can't help but having these thoughts, just like, thank God for the sun, thank God for the rain. This stuff is like, it's what keeps us all here, things moving. And so there's definitely this spiritual, you just get a sense, you can't avoid it, this sense of a deep connection to nature and the spiritual aspect of everything. You just see how it's all connected together after you do it for a few years, and can't take it for granted. I mean, I had my fingers crossed for rain. The pasture at the top of the hill, it's high ground. The grass isn't looking that great. If we don't have grass, we can't grow the meat. And it's like, man, I'm hoping that the rain comes. Just praying for it, like, oh, please, I think it's going to work out. Here comes the rain. Right. You get these thoughts.
Yeah, I actually wanted to ask you about that aspect of things. When you brought up the example of using the rams to keep the maple tree area, basically how you were saying, like, it tells you what you need to do and how to direct resources and how to, what to plant, et cetera. And it's just so interesting that those patterns emerge, and, your kind of job is almost to, like, interpret it correctly and find the solution that's most conducive to a harmonious balance between the different constituent or the different components of the ecosystem that you're fostering, and it's almost like, nature is trying to nudge you or wink to you. It'll be like, yo, like, over here, balance this out and funnel something here. And you're like, oh, okay. And you do it, and you get flourishing and you get balance again. And then it consolidates. And then it's like, yo, over here, do this over here. And, it must be interesting to increase the bandwidth of your communication with nature, broadly speaking.
It's like, at first you don't know what you're looking at. I didn't see the value in the trees. I just saw a bunch of trees, and I didn't really even have a concept of, like, that's a 40-year-old tree. You can't just make that happen. It takes time. And as you walk past and keep observing all this stuff over and over again, all of a sudden you're like, as you learn more too, you realize there's more potential and possibility for how you can continue to tie everything together and utilize it more effectively. And I mean, with permaculture, the whole goal is to constantly be improving nature. You're not trying to take away from it. Your actions should be trying to improve it, and then you get something from taking those actions. The yield comes as well. So yeah, it's just, there's a continuous realization and learning that goes on. I don't see it ever stopping. I'm excited about it too. I don't know what I don't know, you know, and what I'm going to figure out. And
Yeah.
everybody's situation is different. Everybody has this opportunity when if they work closely with their property or with their environment, to make a discovery, and to make an integration that nobody's ever done before. And it's because it's all hyper specific to the environmental factors, the social factors, everything, it ties together. I mean, that in the Money Messiah, you kind of talk about that, like how money is encapsulating in all of this, all of the different aspects. We kind of miss it sometimes, that everything is so tied together.
It must be really the confluence of, you know, the mixture of a renewed or amplified or as yet unexperienced form of gratitude, as well as responsibility, as well as a type of faith, as you're alluding to before, like all these things coming together and being so salient in this type of environment. Whereas before, you know, as you mentioned, in Chicago, LA, whatever, in a city life, you're so removed from all this stuff, you know, like the things that you're contending with are like, you know, the social gossip dynamics at work and what's happening on social media and the blinking lights and everything. You're so removed from the real forces that are causing all of this to actually work and take place and function, so removed from it. And when it sounds like in an environment that you've created for yourself, you're brought back to noticing like the very real patterns and forces of nature that we are subject to and forever, you know, subservient to in a sense, but also that provide an opportunity for us to contribute to positively, you know, to foster more abundance through and more harmony through. And it's, and as you alluded to also, the very real work involved, right? The proof of work that you need to put in. I see your fingertips now, you know, you got dirt underneath them. They're all, you were talking about the physical exertion required. Like it's that engaging in those patterns and like kind of massaging them into a more productive or harmonious, you know, creation, let's say, creating more abundance, creating more life, creating more food, requires that element, requires that, you know, the sweat equity, the work involved.
And I think it's like, in the city, you live this life of it's built around convenience and I mean, in a lot of ways, subsidy. But like in LA, people they had orange trees, they had loquat trees, pomegranates. You'd walk down the sidewalk and there'd be fruit. It's there, and people were just ignoring it. Like, I don't need to take advantage of this. I can. It's more convenient for me to just go to the grocery store and get this stuff. I don't need to go pick all the oranges off my orange tree and make marmalade. Why? I could just go buy marmalade. It takes way too much work for me to do that. It's in that way, their lifestyle is subsidized by this convenience, so they can afford to ignore it, the stuff that's just growing right around them. And so when you're like, I guess I'm just trying consciously to, as a homesteader, the idea is to take what where you live and squeeze every ounce of productivity out of it. But you have to play this balance of, you can't squeeze it too hard, because then you'll destroy what you have. You have to squeeze it just enough so that it's getting better all the time and you're still getting something from it.
Yeah, it's super interesting. Like you're trying to figure out how you can insert yourself into existing patterns of nature to amplify them or to assist in them maintaining a harmonious balance, but increasing the abundance that they produce or something like that. And that's your role in the mix, not to overdo it such that you break the harmony and destroy the resource, but find that sweet spot where, you know, you're a catalyst for more harmonious abundance, something like that.
Yeah, the example of like when we logged the property, I had a forestry consultant come out here and advise on which trees would be beneficial to remove and sell. Now, had I just contacted a logging company who were just interested in buying the trees, they might have just taken every tree that was valuable, and really caused a lot of damage. And so, yeah, there's this balance of you do leave some. You can't, yeah, you just can't take everything at once. I guess I mean, in that regard too, is this idea of the long time preference, waiting, you know, because the act of doing that is actually better in the long run. It will provide you with a more resilient outcome over time. It's very tempting to take the cash from the trees right away and deal with that with the repercussions later.
You know, I've spoken to some Bitcoiners that are getting involved in cattle, and I think a lot of us have potentially somewhat of an overly simplistic view of, like, you know, a house in the woods or a house on the beach with a bunch of land and a bunch of cows on them. And maybe not all, you know, maybe not growing a tremendous amount of food or any of that, but basically just the cows are resilient. They live off the land. You don't have to manage them much beyond moving some fencing. And you've got the bulk of your food taken care of, you know, because a lot of us have a very high meat diet. And then for whatever else you need, you know, your fruits, some veg, your honey, you just exchange it for people in the area, or you buy it at local markets and stuff like that. What was it about the approach you took that you wanted to have a more diversified or a broader approach?
Well, I guess it comes down to so in permaculture, there's the three ethics: earth care, people care, and then redistribution of the abundance. But it's really also this concept of the 12 principles and how you can get those principles to interlock and interact. That's how you accomplish this ever increasing abundance, is by taking your actions and applying these principles to it. And so, like, one of them is to value diversity. And so even though maybe my goal is just to get meat from the sheep, I am trying to diversify. Well, and you're also trying to capture and store energy as much as possible. And growing a bunch of different stuff in a diverse way is capturing the sunlight, the energy, as best you can. And so it's not necessarily to say that you grow an apple tree, you have to do everything. You have to, like, process the apples into cider or make apple butter or anything like that. You just have this thing that's producing something for you, and maybe you can use that to feed an animal. Maybe it's just what I like to call the nature tax, where you're growing plants and things just to encourage more diversity in birds that are on your property, or pollinating insects. So you could just get cows and pasture and move them, and that would be accomplishing one thing. But by integrating all this other stuff into it, that's how you create this strength, this resilient ecosystem, I suppose. If something were to happen to your cattle, then you've got this other stuff that might help you recover from that faster.
You mentioned kind of energy capture there. And of course, you know, we talk a lot about energy in its various forms in the Bitcoin space. How has this enterprise influenced your perspective on energy, generally speaking, you know, and how the role it takes in all of this and in life generally? And you even sent me I think a blog post that I think it was about the different forms of capital. And I think, you know, obviously energy was either one or several of those forms. So how has your perspective on that been influenced by all this?
Well, Bitcoin, I think, really made something click, because it's like, if I can take sunlight and turn it into something, so either that be maple syrup, so now I don't have to buy sugar at the grocery store. I've taken that sunlight, turned it into a product, and so that's more sats that I can, you know, that's less money that I have to spend, so that's more sats that I can save. And then when I produce more of the maple syrup than what I need, now I can sell some for some sats too. And so if you're, I mean, I like to think of it all as we're any farmer is a sunlight farmer. You're just trying to catch as much sunlight and turn it into stuff here on the planet as possible. And then it's how you can utilize that stuff, which you can then, we have Bitcoin now, so we can turn it into Bitcoin. So find somebody who needs that extra stuff that you've got. And I think this is how we ultimately work our way down into, as Bitcoin purchasing power goes up, the deflationary nature, the cost of everything will go down. Farmers will be incentivized to produce as much as they can in an effective way to get those sats. And then at a certain point, enough people are doing it, there's more food and sustenance to go around. Now we can spend our time thinking about other things, you know. But yeah, the energy capture is at the crux of it all. I guess I wrote a little bit about, you know, how agriculture and this stranded energy are kind of the same thing when it comes to, like, you can either mine Bitcoin with stranded energy through the mining rigs, or you can grow some stuff and trade it for Bitcoin. You're producing this stuff out of the sunlight. It's manifesting here, and you can, and then you turn it into sats and you've got something forever.
Everything is just Bitcoin mining, right? Whether you're using ASICs or you're using maple trees, it's just it's just turning energy into sats. That's everything. It boils down to that. We're turning excess energy into sats, maybe.
Yeah, well, and I always I think about, you know, what does a world look like when there is total abundance? What do people, this is going back to the 8 forms of capital. It's like, once you have total abundance and everybody's got their sats that they only need to spend a small fraction of them to survive, and they're just able to save more and more and more, what do people focus on? You know, it's like, I think people focus on art and culture and technology, building, creating even more abundance. You know, Jeff Booth's the deflationary technology ideas. I think these just get exacerbated by Bitcoin, and it's going to happen very quickly too, in my opinion. I think that we're still at the beginning, obviously, but it's a very exciting time to be alive.
I agree with that, but I also wonder, you know, we tend to see the future as the present is, you know, and we extend out trends that we're noticing in the present. But I think part of, and not just the fiat system, but part of that kind of endless hamster wheel of artificial deprivation, let's say, that so many are placed in as a result of the fiat system, that means that they can't do what you just described. They don't have the requisite abundance to deliver to them the free time to consider what is meaningful and what they're interested in and what is novel and what they're curious about, and creating beauty and art and all this kind of stuff. And so as a result of that, I think when we say, oh, well, what happens when they do have that time? We kind of just say, well, they'll have more time to pursue or to amplify the trends that already exist today. And many of us default to, like, wow, crazier technology, right? And I think in the future, of course, the technological trends will continue. But I do think that once we do have such a baseline foundation of security, of financial security, of sustenance, as you described, I think part of the thing we'll spend more time on is meaning and value, and what are the things that are most meaningful and valuable to us. And even though I think technology and possibility, generally speaking, potential will be an aspect of that, I can easily see how in that type of a future, it will be dialed down from the emphasis placed on it today, because today it's almost like, well, that frenetic pace contributes to that just material investigation, and that material investigation leads to rampant technological advancement. But when that pace subsides a bit and we can direct our attention to less pressing concerns and even less material, we might say, well, what is more meaningful? And we have, this discussion is kind of a perfect example, when we have people that are bringing that perspective of the patterns that exist in nature and perhaps our role in that you know, a potential role involved in that. Well, what does that mean for the types of lives and families and communities and cultures that we want to participate in and contribute to? And I think there'll be a greater emphasis on those big questions of from where do we derive meaning and how do we manifest what we find there into the world. And I feel like we'll dial down a little bit the overemphasis on just cool tech innovation that has been the case for the last, whatever, 50, 100 years, et cetera.
Well, and I think to that point too, I mean, a great example of like cool tech going the wrong way is like the tractor. Like that, the tractor is obviously allowed for this incredibly efficient production of food, but it also created a lot of problems, because now you're farming these. I mean, obviously, we've been farming straight rows for a long time, but just the tractor, as you're farming with the tractor, you've got new problems that the tractor itself creates, and then you're on this path of continuously trying. Okay, so I've got to solve this problem that I've created with the tractor in order to keep using my tractor, and then all of a sudden you get to where we are today, where we have these massive pieces of equipment, this monoculture farming, and it probably wouldn't be possible without the tractor. And so it's like I like to think of it going back to like the film industry. When you focus a shot or a picture, you go into focus, past focus, and then back into focus again. And I think we've gone past the point of true focus. We've gotten distracted by all this technology and following the problem, trying to just continuously solve the problems that it's continually creating, which is leading us further and further away from the truth. And I think now we're reeling it back in. Take good stuff from the technology, along with a lot of the old stuff that we forgot and stopped using, because we've been continuously solving these problems that the new technology is creating.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with that. And again, so much, I think Bitcoiners appreciate this more than anybody, but so many people fail to recognize how the incentives that emerge from the monetary and the financial and even the political system to a certain degree influence the world that takes shape, downstream of them, and so part of the reason why you have this like rampant monoculture approach to agriculture, where you're just trying to squeeze as much yield as possible, and fuck, the land is fucked. Well, I don't know, get more fertilizer in and get more tractors in and squeeze more yield in and genetically modify the plant so that they're, we can get even more yield out of it, is, partially because, well, we have to keeping pace with the monetary, degradation, and our savings are not holding up the way that they should. And so we need to get more income from the small piece of land or whatever piece of land that we have. And, and all these different factors that are in some sense artificial as a result of the monetary and the political environment in which they're existing in are, the behavior is adapting to them. And so one of those behaviors, or a part of that behavior, is this overemphasis or obsession with something like yield in the agricultural domain, and having to squeeze everything out of the land. And of course, that not being good for the land, nor the population who eats the food that's produced in that way, nor the producer who's feeling the anxiety and the pressure of having to engage in their land and engage in production in that way. It's a very, seeming to me, a very unhealthy dynamic all around. And I think part of what you're doing, and part of what, an emerging perspective that would be better, and I think that Bitcoin helps to foster because of its characteristics, is one that's more conducive to one, being better for the land, being better for the person who's tending the land, being better for the people that are eating the products of the land, and finding a way to, again, back to the prior conversation, harness that energy and turn it into sustenance and turn it into even meaning in its various forms, in a more harmonious, in a more balanced, in a more healthy way. And that, I guess that's why we Bitcoin, right? Or at least, and that's why we do what you're doing, and that's why we try to figure out in what ways these approaches can be improved and how we can engage in better incentives to make them propagate more effortlessly.
Yeah, I mean, a good example of that is like if on a corn or soybean field, you get a certain amount of caloric production on average. Well, this guy Mark Shepard, he thinks that you can get just as much from chestnut trees, and so the chestnut tree grows tall, and you can still grow stuff underneath in the understory of the chestnut tree. So now you're producing just as many calories per acre with the chestnuts, and you can add a whole nother layer of like chestnut finished pork underneath it. And these are practices that have been happening, that they used to happen, but when you're on that fiat hamster wheel, you don't think that you have time to wait for the chestnut trees to grow to start producing. So you don't even have the incentive to plant them in the first place. And so there's solutions, they exist. It's just Bitcoin will create those incentives and allow people the chance to wait for the trees to grow. Planting fruit orchards too. A lot of people around here have been pulling up their grapes and their fruit. I don't know necessarily why, but it's like, that seems crazy to me. They spent years waiting for those crops to mature, those plants to mature, and now that for whatever reason it doesn't make sense to grow them anymore. I don't know.
Yeah. It's almost like nature has an optimal time preference, because as you said about the trees and stuff, like it operates on its own time. And maybe it's the case that the degree to which, all other animals kind of plug into that time scale and that shifting, the way that nature moves through time and different seasons and that kind of stuff. And they find a harmonious balance. And maybe it's the case that the degree to which you depart from that is the degree to which the organism experiences challenges or degradation to a certain extent. I mean, look around the world today and look at the type of people that this system is conjuring up, and broadly speaking, and it ain't good, to put it mildly. Like, the people are, let's say, just to put it mildly, far from the optimal versions of their physiological cells, or a physiological version of the cells that's optimized. And not that everyone's going to have that necessarily preference or goal for themselves, but again, it's just blatantly obvious that we've departed in some way from the patterns or the movements or the wisdom of nature, and the effects are just horrendous. And it seems like one of the ways that we get back to that is humbling ourselves by extending our time preference out to be more in line with the one that nature is somewhat dictating. And it seems to be the case that Bitcoin is a perfect instrument for allowing us to do that.
Yeah, I mean, in the example of paying attention to the seasons and getting more, when we first got started out here, we kept getting caught off guard. Like, okay, here's spring, we're not ready. What are we supposed to do over the wintertime? We don't know. It's you learn really fast how divorced you are from the following of the seasons and stuff like that. And yeah, it's just I think that the more, I guess, you do get in tune with it, the more things start to make sense as far as the reason why things were the way they were. It's like, I keep trying to think about what people used to do and why, and there's good reasons, but we've been able to, I guess, I keep think of it as subsidy, but the fiat mindset or whatever has allowed us to focus so much on to just live in this world of convenience, where we are able to just disregard and forget all of this useful stuff that people spent thousands of years figuring out and working on.
Yeah, and I think one of the things it's talked about a lot today, but I think in the wrong context. I'm not one of those environmental catastrophist types, but I think many of us can recognize that the course we're on in many different domains of our life is unsustainable. And I think, fiat has been a massive contributor to fostering and to incentivizing unsustainable ways. And those are showing up again in our physiological health, and they're showing up in our impact on the environment, and they're showing up in many different ways. And again, I think a lot of those are resolved by, being more in tune, in a more harmonious and more respectful, in a more understanding, grateful relationship with nature. And again, what do you know? This weird internet money seems to be facilitating a return to that type of a harmony, which, of course, for a lot of people would sound so absurd, because it's hard to think of something more quote unquote technological, that's something that doesn't even really exist. These just abstractions of this thing on the internet, but that it's causing a return to a proper orientation to nature, to ourselves, to one another, that's fostering a far more, and that has the great potential to foster a world, families, communities, cultures, worlds that is far more sustainable, that we don't have to be so terrified of, that we're, that it's going to end somehow, or that, and again, not the climate catastrophe stuff, but just the unnecessary degradation of the environments that we're using to sustain ourselves.
Yeah, there's definitely, I mean, it's just becoming clear that if we continue to utilize the resources we have in the way, it's inefficient, it's wasteful.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's so cool about Bitcoin mining, is that it's like, I have this idea that you're mining all of this stranded energy somewhere, but and so the energy that you're utilizing to mine Bitcoin is as valuable as the Bitcoin you're mining. But then all of a sudden you might start to, if you're thinking about things through a permaculture mindset, you might find other reasons to use that energy that can actually be utilized to actually buy more Bitcoin and then actually mining it. The whole idea of, the hydro dam that doesn't make sense to build because nobody's there, but it does make sense to build it because you can start mining Bitcoin with it. And then all of a sudden, since it's there, well, now people might start showing up and using that energy to start doing stuff around that hydro dam. Yeah. And so it's just the mining aspect of Bitcoin in making energy usage more efficient is there. But then also just the idea of, like, as you hold your sats, you're increasing the purchasing power of everybody else. This kind of idea in the Money Messiah, where you if you're trying to work towards your true ideal, if you hold your sats, like I'm thinking, like, okay, if we don't need money anymore because we have total abundance, or the money is kind of not really a super important aspect to our lives because we can survive with or without it. It's more of you're holding these sats, and if you die and you pass your sats on to your relatives, then it's kind of like a scorecard or something for how well you were in alignment with the creative forces, because you were not wasting those sats on frivolous things. You chose to only spend them either to do something to increase the efficiency of your usage of your energy to make more sats, or you had no reason to spend them, and therefore you utilized the sats in the best way possible.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective on it. And I know, many people will take issue with that and say, well, what's the problem with me spending it on fun stuff? If I got a bunch of money, everyone likes to go for a ride on a yacht and stuff like that. But it is interesting that, for some people, you could interpret it that way, because there's clearly a moral dimension that seems to be emerging around Bitcoin. And you might say, like, how does one's sat balance indicate, how they found that optimal path between order and chaos in their life, and how is it fair, or can we judge them based on that? To a certain degree, that's inevitable, and it'll be interesting to see how perspectives on that shift as we go along, and as this culture kind of complexifies and emerges and becomes more broadly adopted. And it is interesting. The whole, like, energy buyer of last resort, I think, is kind of what you're getting at, because right now in this current era, it hasn't necessarily always been the case, because Bitcoin mining has been extremely profitable. So it may be one of the best uses of energy to just, start that dam and mine Bitcoin with it. But the fact that in the future, let's say, the profit margin on Bitcoin comes down to a certain degree, to have this energy buyer of last resort everywhere, to get the flywheel going for whatever other better, more valuable uses of energy might emerge in the future. As you were saying, like, maybe you bootstrap something because you can automatically monetize energy at source, but maybe that flourishes into using that energy to whatever, as we were discussing earlier, how meaning enters the picture. And I think more and more in this environment, meaning is going to direct, well, it's difficult to separate value and meaning, but just, I guess to oversimplify or maybe be a little bit too vague, but I think, meaning will guide our preferences and our behavior and things like that. And to be able to redirect energy that maybe got its start because of something like mining Bitcoin into uses that we find more meaningful, maybe Bitcoin mining will allow that process to happen because because you can be guaranteed that no matter where you have energy, you're going to be able to have an initial buyer and a last resort buyer. And that just opens up the opportunity to figure out the best uses for energy for every individual, to figure out what the most meaningful or valuable uses of energy for them are.
I mean, I've got a little creek that runs, it feeds my pond, it's spring fed. And I kind of figured out, okay, if I put a pipe and I make this little micro hydro thing, how many watts can I produce? And it's like, well, I can produce like continuously 50 to 100 watts by my calculations. And it's like, I don't know how effective getting a miner on that will be, but this idea of like the home miner being able to, well, I'm already heating my water with electricity, why not just have it be a Bitcoin miner too? And so then all of a sudden the hash rate will be distributed much more evenly across everyone across the world. I mean, theoretically, right? But then all of a sudden it's like the network is secured by people who are using this energy regardless. So they don't necessarily, any sats that they get is a bonus. And I started thinking about this is kind of changing the subject a little bit, but there's been some discussion about like, okay, what's the security budget for once the subsidy stops? Like what is going to happen? Well, if people are using Bitcoin to suss out the true value and meaning of things, well, that's something that is worth tithing for. I think people have tithed in religions, giving up some of their hard-earned money to promote, to give to the church. Well, the church is the miners. And so as a transaction, when you make a transaction, if you're tithing, you'll just add a high transaction fee as your tithe, as your contribute to the network. And if everybody's mining and there's a mining pool, then you might even get some of those sats back when you tithe. I don't know. I just been thinking about how this more religious type of culture could develop over time with Bitcoin. Maybe
I think, well, one, for the record, very much against the tail mission idea, but I do think you're right in that like these, if it becomes a problem in the future, then there will be, people will be searching for ways to play their part perhaps in ameliorating the problem. And maybe something like you described is a way they'll do it. When you brought up the hodling and example of and using what are we talking about? A hydro dam sort of idea. Like it's almost like sats that are held are the reservoir, and the ones that pass through the turbines are when there's a valuable use, they pass through the turbine, and otherwise they're held in a big reserve. And as more and more people hold the capacity to use those that energy for valuable application just grows and grows, and that dam is what determines what passes through. And perhaps a little bit of a lazy analogy, but as we all know, Bitcoin forces these sorts of metaphors and analogies on people.
The act of holding your sats is an act of philanthropy, because by holding them, you're increasing the value of the sats, so that when the people that do need to spend them, they have a higher purchasing power because you held yours. And so that's my point in like, if you hold your Bitcoin to the grave, you're being a philanthropist, and you didn't have to give anything away. You just had to hang on to it.
It's so crazy to think of the implications of a system that works in that way. Constantly mind-blowing, as we're all aware. One of the questions I wanted to ask you, just kind of nuts and bolts of things. I spoke to a guy in Australia who, over the course of the last 2 years, had got some land and got some cows on it and was starting to, I think he had 10, 15 heads, something like that. And there was two things, one, supply chains have been a mess over the last 2 years. Inflation is obviously a big factor for all sorts of inputs that one might have on a farm or a permaculture operation. And so there's two things that I've noticed some Bitcoiners that are dabbling in this stuff have been emphasizing. One is to have as few inputs as possible. So for example, if you're a rancher, then having land that can sustain the cattle grazing, so you don't have to buy feed, and you don't have to buy oil to grow feed or use tractors and all that kind of stuff. And so in his case, inflation was actually a positive, because he was able to, his inputs hadn't gone up, but he was able to charge more, or at least it wasn't a negative. He was able to charge more for his meat. And then the other one is like, well, recognizing that you're going to have some, let's say, machinery or equipment that you are going to need, and probably going to need it in perpetuity into the future, and recognizing that supply chains may lock up even further, especially if there's contentious issues between the US and China, or equipment producers and markets for their equipment, and trying to find ways of, one, reducing the dependence on equipment, but two, even producing some themselves, having local, or having networks of people that, they make this piece of equipment, or someone has 3D printers that produce this little widget and that kind of stuff. And has that been a consideration or a problem in terms of inflation for you at this point? Or how have you been dealing with that?
Well, we've definitely, since the beginning of like 2020, it was kind of like we were kind of playing. It felt like we were playing a game or something prior to 2020. Like, but because it was just a kind of affordable. Oh, we could go, if we need to, we can go to the feed store and get a bag of feed. Now it's like, we need to learn we need to be taking one step closer to not needing those inputs. Use the tractor as little as possible. If I'm using the tractor, I want to be doing something that's permanent, digging earthworks. I don't want to be using my tractor just to pull my shade shelter around for the sheep. I do that right now, but I'm trying to, we've got these horses now, so let's use the horses to pull the shade shelter. It's things like that. We're trying to grow, like in the case of the rabbits, we used to feed mix. We've been able to figure out how to, instead of feeding them a grain mix every day, just go and cut plants around the property that are growing like they're technically weeds, but that's rabbit food. And so as you integrate things more and more, your inputs become less and less. Now, all of that, the machinery and everything like that, you just have to look at it as like an incredibly useful tool and see it for what it is. Like, you got to take that oil while it's still cheap, really, when it comes down to it. Using that stuff to do stuff that has a long lasting impact, that will produce energy dividends for long periods of time, long after you've burned it. And yeah, I don't think that there's no way people could have been farming back in the day with all these inputs. That it just isn't profitable. There's techniques that people were using, and we can take that, combine it with what we know now, and get even more than people were able to do in the past. I mean, Sri Lanka, that was a kind of an interesting thing that I've been seeing, where they said, oh, well, I don't really know specifically what's going on there, but from what I've heard, it's like they said everybody they can't use chemical fertilizers anymore. They have to farm organically, whatever that means. Well, it's like you can't flip a switch like that and expect people to know how to get the good yields, when they've been using these techniques that require those inputs. That's one of those time preference things where you have to be building your soil slowly. You can't just, or the tree, the tree you can't just make a 40-year-old tree because you want to. You got to let it grow. You can't just have deep topsoils, rich topsoils, because you want them. You have to grow them over time. And so it's having a mindset of reducing the inputs as much as possible over time, whilst not ignoring the fact that you may need some.
Yeah, and I mean, look at what's happening in the Netherlands right now. That just seems like whatever their motivations were, it seems like the government was just like, reduce nitrogen, or we're they're doing something to impose quite a heavy burden on, a big portion of the farmers. And they were like, that's not on. We can't do that, or this is just a grab for our land, or whatever. Again, the motivation was, and obviously they're trying to stand up for themselves right now. And I suspect more of this kind of stuff will happen, right? As these perverse ambitions and motivations and incentives from the quote unquote ruling class are imposed on people that are, even in the cases of those farms that we were critical of a few minutes ago, those kind of, monoculture sort of operations, even in those, the bureaucrats are so disconnected from the reality on the ground. It's like, hey, like if we do what you want us to do on the time scale that you're making us do it, shit doesn't work. It's just, I'm sorry, we can't. Yeah, nature doesn't care for your fiat decrees. There's you can only be pushed so far, and it doesn't matter what you think is right or wrong or good or any of that shit. And I feel like, of course, that's going to happen more and more as, hopefully the fiat system reaches its zenith and hopefully begins to unwind. I say hopefully because obviously we want a different system, but I recognize there's a lot of turmoil and hardship that will likely be a part of that. But it just, every day you open up Twitter and you just see the clown show on full display where it's all this nonsensical stuff is being imposed on people by a bunch of fucking morons.
Well, I think the problem, as the inflation goes up, as the price signals get even more and more distorted, profitability, there's just no, okay, so the farmers in the United States are incredibly subsidized. Well, once that subsidy stops meaning anything because the money is worthless, then their operations become unprofitable and they have no choice but to figure something else out. So the problem will fix itself. It's just, are you going to be ahead of the curve, or are you going to be trying to hold on to those techniques that are no longer profitable?
Yeah. Are you an outlier in your area, or are there many operations like you? And if you are an outlier, what have you been hearing amongst, the people in your area around, price of energy inputs, inflation, all this stuff?
So there's another farm down the road. We're friends with them. We actually get a lot of our sheep genetics from them. So they'll go to this one farm, in Wisconsin, they'll pick up sheep, they'll breed for a year, and then we get kind of the hand-me-downs from them to keep the genetics going. But they do, I don't know if they're certified organic, they're animal welfare certified. They try and do permaculture, practice the permaculture principles and ideologies as much as they can. But they're trying to do kind of that movie, The Biggest Little Farm. They're trying to do it fast and big, and not grow slowly. I mean, that's one of the principles of permaculture too, is small and slow solutions. You need the time to recognize how to maximize your efficiency. There's a lot of efficiency that gets lost when you try and move too fast. And so they're similar to us, but having lots of problems because there's a lot of profitability losses in trying to get too big too fast. And then just most of the people around here are conventional farmers. I bought a cast iron sink from a guy down the road. He had it sitting on the side of the road, and he had an apple orchard. And I was saying, like, well, I don't even want to spray my apples. That seems like crazy. Why would I want to spray? He's like, good luck ever trying to grow any fruit, get any real fruit. But I'm like, maybe the fruit that I grow isn't going to be to sell at a grocery store. Maybe I'm going to feed animals with that fruit. I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but I know that it makes sense to grow it and not spray it. And people see me moving the fences too all the time. I'm dragging these fences around pretty much every day, every other day. I'm moving fences. And my one neighbor says, why don't you just fence in the whole field? What are you doing? Why do you do it like that? And I'm like, because then I can distribute the manure and urine evenly, and I get a really intense impact on the soil. If I just fence in the whole field, then the sheep, they'll camp over here and they won't touch this stuff over there. And I'm not really, I'm losing rather than building. So it's like that, once again, that kind of proof of work concept. So yeah, we are an outlier in the area. I'm trying to do classes. I'm writing this intro to permaculture course. I'm trying to, with the Airbnb, I give these tours. All the guests that come through, I offer them a tour, and I really try and hammer in like, this is a way to do things that is different, but look at it. You can see for yourself it's successful. And just trying to expose as many people to this. I think people just don't know it's an option. They don't realize it. I mean, I think more people know about Bitcoin than permaculture at this point. Permaculture is a very small concept that really hasn't come to the forefront yet. I'm very excited that so many Bitcoiners are interested in it, though. It's
one of the things I often think about is how, and again, this can be catalyzed by many different causes, but it seems to be the case that Bitcoin is a big one for causing people to question what things like value and wealth actually mean to them. And, I think broadly speaking, again, we could say that like there seems to be a pretty clear what wealth means in the fiat culture, and there seems to be an emerging definition in Bitcoin land that is different to that. And, the notion of, or the concept of soil wealth is one that at least I've heard before. And it seems like, when you were giving that example of your neighbor and how you move the fences around, it would seem that that is, at least in part, a result of considering soil wealth and wanting to cultivate it as a genuine form of wealth, and not just considering it as like, area to be used to harvest a particular type of yield, let's say. And so how has being involved in this enterprise changed, expanded, influenced your notion of what wealth is?
Well, I guess that kind of goes back to the 8 forms of capital concept, where yes, there is more when you do one action, how much can you get out of it? How are you, when we're integrating things together, we're trying to, for every use of our energy, get more returns. And so returns from many different directions. Like you said, now I'm not just moving the sheep to grow meat, I'm moving the sheep to improve my soil too. And I'm managing the trees and everything the way that we're doing it for more than one reason. And it's all tied together. Now, the concept of wealth, I guess, is like, there's just knowing that I've got food. Even if everything, our fruit trees didn't grow and our annual vegetables didn't grow, it's like I could always go out there and harvest an animal and have meat. It's like a battery just waiting to be, it's charged up and it's just waiting for me to access the energy in there. The same thing with I've got this walnut tree in my backyard. It was just a little seedling. It kind of found its way into the yard, and I just mowed around it, starting out just in my, in the middle of my yard. And now it's 40 feet tall. 7 years later, it's big, and it's gaining $100 in value every year just from me putting some wood chips around it and mowing around it. And so I start to see the value in all of these things, all this stuff that's just, it's there. You just have to know that what it's useful for, and that it's valuable. And so then all of a sudden you start to see your wealth as not just how many sats you have, or how much stuff you have, but like, the fact that I'm free to use my time however I want, essentially, is huge. People sometimes I think that I'm retired or something, because I can just say, oh well, we're gonna go do that. I can do that today. I guess I can choose to not do some of the obligations that I have, and go do this instead. Granted, we live 10 miles from the beach. We never go to the beach, but it's right. Anyways, we have the freedom to use our time the way we want, and we choose to just continue to build here. But I guess, does that answer your question on wealth? My perspective.
Yeah, I mean, very much. It's a perfectly reasonable and suitable answer. And you mentioned the Money Messiah piece that I wrote a few months back a couple times, and one of the I guess observations I make in that is, I think one of the greatest forms of wealth, possibly even the greatest, that people strive to in different ways, and perhaps the manner in which they strive towards them even reflects a certain moral dimension or coherence with a type of truth or whatever, is freedom. You say you have available to you all these different sources of wealth, but ultimately what do they track back to? They track back to you being able to determine for yourself what you do with your time and what your life is, and you're able to have and maintain the necessary freedom in order to do that by virtue of the various forms of wealth that you've accrued for yourself, be they sats, be they soil, be they sheep, be they walnuts, whatever. And so so often it seems to track back to that, the idea of wealth, or at least maybe this is even my own judgment or imposition, but it seems like a very reasonable framing or conception of wealth is things that deliver to you freedom. And then maybe the moral dimension of that is, when established, or to the degree that you have freedom, what do you do with it? And so I think it's a perfectly reasonable answer to the question.
Yeah, I mean, like if you develop, like Edgar Casey, I kind of messaged you about him a little bit. He always references, he was very into Christianity as a religion, but he often said that he had this idea of the journey of the soul, right? He thought that you can reincarnate, your soul could come back to earth many times. And the whole purpose of you having these generations of coming back over and over again was to work towards an ideal. Like, and that's what you talk about in Money Messiah, or wrote about a lot, is this striving towards an ideal is what essentially is the name of the game here. And when you have freedom, that gives you the best ability to achieve what your ideal is. And obviously the ideal is I like to think of it as static, but it changes over time. I write these things down. It's like, well, what's my ideal? It's like, well, to make the world better for my children and their grandchildren. That's a pretty big idea. What does that even mean? I don't know. But you have to, these big concepts, when you have the freedom, you can start to work them out instead of worrying about the day-to-day, shit, am I going to be late for work?
Exactly.
I forgot to fill up the car with gas, and now I got to stop to get gas on the way. Well, I guess it's just, you get distracted.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like you need freedom to even be put in a position where you can even express your morality or you're striving towards the ideal. Because if you don't even have the freedom, you're not even in the game. As you say, you're on somebody else's clock, you're in somebody else's game, you're subordinate to deprivation and anxiety and all this kind of stuff. Now, then that doesn't obviously free you from an ethical judgment. You're still in charge of your behavior, but it seems like the more freedom you have, the more you're able to explore and express what those ideals or what that morality or ethic might be, and you can strive toward it more capably, more in a more unobstructed manner. And I think that's amazing. That's one of the reasons. That's one of the reasons why we consider why we value freedom so much, and why freedom is so often associated with responsibility. Because it's like, hey, now you're the boss, right? You get to decide what your actions are going to be. What should they be? And of course, as you say, I mean, some are time bound. When we're striving towards things, some are time bound and spatially bound. Like, I need to get here in order to get there, in order to get there. And some might be eternal, right? And this is where we wind up in the realm of philosophy and religion and theology, and these values and principles, these eternal values and principles that have been elucidated or discussed throughout history, and their relevance in helping us to strive towards all those other subordinate things of value that we might identify in our lives.
And I think that we're moving towards a world where people are going to start cooperating with each other, not out of necessity for survival, but out of desire to do some cool shit. Once again, I'm, and this is under the assumption that it's possible to create the abundance that I imagine is available out there. But I just think that it won't, the vast majority of people will be able to live in a lifestyle in which they get to choose now how they want to cooperate with others, rather than feel like they need to out of the ability just to keep their family alive and well and everything. So,
and it seems in such an environment reasonable to assert that those determinations, like about who you get involved with or cooperate with, would be increasingly determined on the basis of character. If, because if everyone is sovereign, right? If you have the financial and other fundamental base layer of security, and you're increasingly freeing yourself up, then as you just said, you don't have to commit yourself to being engaged or involved or cooperating with people that you don't want to be, that you don't think are representations of certain values or principles. And so I think, those determinations on who to get wrapped up with will be increasingly skewed towards depending upon things like character and things like, virtue and things like, the values and principles that certain people express, in addition to perhaps, trust. Maybe in the future, in a Bitcoin world or in these sorts of communities, the handshake will reemerge as sufficient agreement, and you won't need super complex legal and lawyer and the state involved in so many things, even when there's maybe even considerable capital on the line. It's, I feel like the element of trust will, as a result of it not being necessary in so many other domains, or having been like, not being such a big consideration in other domains, because, you can verify and you know that you're, that trust can't be broken in many regards, that it'll free you up to use trust in other domains where it's a more beneficial means of establishing understanding, cooperation, agreements than the model that exists today in an environment where nobody trusts anybody, and you need so much complexity and so much threat of force involved in order to get anything done.
All of a sudden, we have a system in which you can demand transparency, and verifiably so. So that creates so you can choose to be private with the Bitcoin and with how it's being used, but you can also demand that I will not cooperate with you unless I know these things and be able to verify it. And that I just don't know if that's really existed in the past. I mean, there's probably analogies of layers of trust, but this is all. Bitcoin's all you need. That's all you need to know is, are the sats there, and who's can you sign the can you sign for them? Do you have control over them or not? I mean, the implications on like governance systems in regard to that are huge. All of a sudden you can have these. I mean, and the idea of these federated mints, where now you have a community bank, essentially a federation of neighbors that are pooling their resources together to accomplish something locally. Those possibilities, I just don't know if they've ever existed like that before. And we're just like we're brushing right up against the start of experimenting with some of this stuff. It's just, it's exciting, man.
Totally. I mean, very early days, and there will be lots of mistakes and false starts along the way and stuff. But I think point being is that a new system is now available to tinker with and experiment with, and it seems likely to be the case that it's going to generate a lot of improved methods of governance and interaction and cooperation than we've probably ever had access to. It's probably late in the discussion to ask you this question, but I never did. We never did cover how Bitcoin entered the scene for you, because as I understand it from a few messages we exchanged back and forth, you were doing all this already, and then in March 2020, when shit hit the fan, you had an epiphany of some kind, and Bitcoin kind of reemerged or emerged. I'm not sure what your history with it was, and that's when you decided to go down the rabbit hole, and it's been kind of it's been a rabbit hole journey since, as many of us can relate to. And so 2 questions on that. What was that moment like, and how did it come about? And then we've covered a bunch of this already throughout this discussion, but if there's anything that we haven't covered in terms of how an understanding of Bitcoin has influenced your approach to what you've been doing with the farm, I'd love to know what those were or are.
Yeah, I was my Bitcoin story is I was exposed to it a few times here and there. You know, I think it was like in 2014, a friend of mine got scammed doing some cloud mining. I don't know. I guess like I don't know how it worked, but he told me about this Bitcoin thing, and he was mining Bitcoin, but then all of a sudden he wasn't able to get any of it. And then back when the previous $20,000 all-time high, I had friends coming over with Coinbase, being like, "Look, I got all this stuff. The price is going up every day. This is insane." And I didn't have two nickels to rub together at the time, so I couldn't play that game at the time. You know, so I had heard of Bitcoin a few times, but I didn't really understand it or know too much about it. I just knew that it was like this thing that could go up in value very quickly, and you could make some cash with it. You know, you could buy Bitcoin and sell it for more later. So I was meditating, and right after the COVID crash happened, and I just sat up, and I had this premonition: check the price of Bitcoin. You know, check the price of Bitcoin. Oh, okay. I look up. It was like $5,000 or something, and I was like, well, it looks like the price has gone down to a point where I should maybe think about trying to figure out how to get some. And it took me about a week of like going on YouTube, trying to learn how it all worked and how to not get hacked. And it was a very foreign concept to me. And I figured out how to get some. And then obviously once you have some, you start saying, well, maybe now that I've got this thing, I should learn a little bit, keep learning about it. I've got real money on the line now. And so, yeah, just one thing led to another. Until here I am thinking that Bitcoin is going to like save the planet. But it happens fast too. I mean, it's amazing how much information, even from 2020 to now, the proliferation of information around Bitcoin and the access to learning about it has increased. And even just the ways to gain access to it, it's like almost been exponential as far as I can tell. But it's definitely, I mean, my wife's not the biggest fan of my obsession with Bitcoin, but it's definitely, I can't help but see everything through the lens of it now. Like it especially like after reading the Money Messiah article, it's like it does seem like this lens of truth that you can use to see the true value of things. Like Bitcoin, I think, will ultimately be the baseline for your decisions. Like, do I send or spend this Bitcoin so that I can make more later because I'm investing in something a profitable endeavor, or do I hang on to it because I don't know what to do with it right now? And so obviously the long time preference. Like a perfect example is like Bitcoin was close to $60,000. This winter, and I wanted to buy this electric chainsaw because I just hate messing around with the freaking gas powered chainsaws. I don't know much about small engines. They're always stopping, and I'm having to clean the carburetors out, and it's a bear for me to really figure out how to use these chainsaws well and keep them sharp and whatever. So I was like, man, if I already have this certain tool set. If I get the chainsaw, I've already got some batteries that I can plug into it, and maybe it's not going to be able to cut down the biggest trees that I can, but it'll incentivize me to use the chainsaw a lot more often. And I didn't buy it. I just said, I think I'm better off just messing around with the stupid gas powered chainsaw I have and holding on to these sats. And, you know, now in hindsight, I wish I would have cashed in a little bit up there, but you know, so it just makes you really question, do I need this crap that I want to get? You know, do I spend my sats? You have to play that balance of opportunity cost. Will the spending of the sats help me make more sats in the future, or am I better off holding on to them?
Yeah, I agree. And that is such a more ultimately beneficial, I think, like comparative tool for your decision making, because it really makes you consider what value is and whether the value that you can derive from exchanging your sats for something versus holding them is worthwhile. And what among other things, I think part of the effect of that is that it ends up meaning that like only the things of extreme value end up, your life becomes filled with only things of extreme value, because everything else just is like, nope, That's not valuable enough for me to consider or for me to exchange my savings for. But these things might be, and these things might be beauty and family and health and, those sorts of things, those more transcendent things. And all the frivolous shit, it's an immediate like, fuck no. And of course, the inevitable outcome of that is like when your mind and your life is so much more populated by those things of extreme or transcendent value, you're probably going to be a happier, more well-adjusted person, because those things are real. They're true. I mean, again, this is, we wind right up in theological territory, because it's like, what does it mean that those things deliver that type of joy or that type of satisfaction or that type of energy? And it would seem to mean that like they're somehow truer than those frivolous things that you've discarded as a result of this comparative value, engaging in comparing value in this way. And what does it mean for the thing that's allowing you to do that, right? What do you call that thing that allows you to discover value better than everything else, that allows you to engage value, that even allows you to become more valuable? And so you wind up with all sorts of weird ideas as a result of those processes taking place. I don't mean to be too personal here, but is your wife totally against Bitcoin, or just doesn't see is not wearing the orange colored glasses as heavily tinted as you are?
Yeah, I'd say that she has Bitcoin too, but she doesn't. She sees it in a different way.
Right.
I like I said, I see this as like a tool. Well, like how I was interested in filmmaking, I was like, this is the universal language. I could use this to like change the world and really express some good ideas to people and reveal some information, get information out there. And I think Bitcoin is just, well, it's obviously the most important now thing for doing that. And she just doesn't really see that yet. Maybe she never will. I don't know, but she certainly doesn't like. I can't help myself. We spend a lot of time together. We don't see a lot of different people, and I'm just talking about this stuff all the time. And I think that's part of it too. She's like, can we talk about anything else? Like, what? Please, let's have a different conversation right now.
I feel like what you're saying right now is many people can relate to that experience, myself included. I mean, it's why I started the podcast in late 2019, because I just needed someone else other than my girl. We were living in Thailand at the time in a similar situation. Like, we didn't have a big social group, and she was just, she understood that it was something that was really important and meaningful to me. So it's not like it was a problem for us, but I'm sure she was happy to see that I had another outlet to have these conversations with other people rather than just her. But it's not something that you can force on people, right? It's people see it in their own time, and maybe they do and maybe they don't, and that's just the way the cookie crumbles.
And the Bitcoin meetup really scratches the itch in a great way. I am just so grateful for having discovered that Bitcoin meetup is right down the road. I don't know how. It's just another one of those serendipitous things where it's like I was getting ready to drive to Chicago to go to BitDevs because I was that hungry to like talk to some people who are deep into Bitcoin in person. And then I was listening to there was a shout out on what was Marty Bent's podcast, and it's like, oh yeah, there's a Bitcoin meetup in Benton Harbor, Michigan. What? That's right down the road for me. All right, let's go do that.
There's got to be a resource that like identifies all the Bitcoin meetups, is there not? Like all over the US or all over the world, like a page you can go to that just points them all out. I feel like I've seen something like that.
Yeah, because I've been trying to find. I did do a little. I can't remember the website. There is a list of ones somewhere, and then I think just like I search on meetup.com. It seems like it's still kind of the standard practice for people making Bitcoin meetups to post them on meetup.com. Because I've got a friend in Southern Illinois where I'm like, dude, you need to find a meetup, and some people in Denver, and then Milwaukee too. And I'm just like trying now. I'm like, you have to go to these Bitcoin meetups. This is how, because now you get in touch with people who actually know how to use Bitcoin. You can buy and sell sats from each other, or buy and sell stuff. I bring maple syrup. I brought some maple syrup to the Bitcoin meetup, sold some for sats there. Nice. It's just all of a sudden there's and people I think are hungry to collaborate with other Bitcoiners, and this is how you
Totally.
get together with them. You get face to face with them. It's I mean I can't recommend it enough for anyone that lives close to a Bitcoin meetup. Find it and go to it.
It definitely seems to me like there's a hunger for like the circular economy, like transacting with Bitcoiners, whether it's buying and selling Bitcoin, but more and more the case, other goods, like, because one, you can be reasonably certain that if it comes from a Bitcoiner, it's probably high quality. It's probably made or produced with an ethic that you might agree with, whether it's, in the realm of arts and crafts or whether it's in the realm of, food and agriculture, like it was done properly with the right amount of time and care and that kind of stuff. And you want to transact with people that share so many, ultimately values with you as they're represented in Bitcoin, and Bitcoin being that kind of shelling point for bringing all those people together and allowing each other to identify themselves as those types of people, or as people that have a similar value set or a similar, value hierarchy. And it definitely, my observation is that people really want to transact with one another, and all the better that the different things that Bitcoiners are getting involved in producing, be it cattle, lamb, oranges, wine, art, that's been really cool over the last 2 years to see that really start to proliferate, right? Whereas that was never a huge part of the discussion prior to that. But now, like, there's just people out there doing cool shit and saying like, yo, I'm a Bitcoiner and I'll sell my stuff for Bitcoin and this is what it is. And I think there's, that's how the circular economy that ends up becoming the economy maybe in the future gets bootstrapped, gets going.
Yeah, I mean, it goes from being this distributed, like internet-based subculture where you get I mean, I'd imagine if I was trying to sell my stuff online for Bitcoin, people would be they don't know me, they don't they don't interact with me. So it's just when you get together face to face with people, all of a sudden there's this like we were talking about, this handshake can happen, this true trust and real relationship can be created. And so now it's like it is a subculture, the Bitcoin, using Bitcoin and interacting with other Bitcoiners is a subculture. And I personally, I just like to be a part of it. And this Bitcoin meetups are a great way to do it, actually do it.
Totally.
It's not any mysterious online and not pseudonymous Twitter handles anymore. It's the real people.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, one example that seems to be doing, going very well is I think it's only maybe in Texas or in the South or whatever, but this cattle cooperative where, Bitcoiners came together with certain cattle producers and were like, look, we want better access to higher quality food made by people that share certain values in order to be more resilient, more healthy, more strong, more affordable, all this kind of stuff. And it seems like many people have come to like be a part of that or take advantage of it in some way. And I think more of that is coming, and that, that'll be a very good thing.
I mean, it makes a lot of sense that the very beginnings of it are energy and food, like the things that people need no matter what, that you will always have a need for energy and food. And so the fact that these are some of the first ways that people are spending their Bitcoin, well, you have to buy food. If you're one of these people who got on zero, and you're going to be spending your sats on food, you have to, you have to survive. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense that, oh, go ahead.
No, you took the words out of my mouth. I was going to say, yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead. Did you have something to finish off there?
Yeah.
Well, man, this has been super interesting conversation. Was there any element of the what you're doing or ambitions or plans that we haven't covered that you think would be useful or interesting to cover?
Well, I think that I just want people to realize that there's no like right way to practice permaculture or to like start homesteading, or there's no authority on this stuff. Almost everyone in every situation, if you're creative enough, can start to produce some of your own things, whether it's soap Or, I mean, if you got a roof, you can have bees. You know, if you have a garage, you can probably grow rabbits. You can grow microgreens in your basement, or tilapia in a IBC tote down there. There's just a lot of ways for people to start becoming more sovereign in almost any situation, and not to feel like the end get like I have to go get a ranch and have 10 cattle, and if I can't do that, then I'm screwed. No, there's a lot of little steps you can start taking now. Have a worm bin under your sink and start composting. These kinds of ideas. Try and be more efficient with your water usage. Start producing some of your own hygiene products. Make your own soap or toothpaste or whatever it might be, because whatever you're interested in, you feel that empowerment of being able to make it yourself. You start to think more. You ask yourself, well, what else can I do? What's the next thing that I can do? And this is how I started, just one step at a time. I walked away from normal society, and now here I am. I'm looking back. I'm like, I don't even know who I was. You know, it's like I'm a different person now, totally different. And it's just because of the one little thing at a time. So.
And so you make like soap and toothpaste and that for yourself?
Yep. Soap, toothpaste. We brew our own beer. Man, just about everything that you could imagine is. If we can try and make it ourselves, we've tried it, you know. Now, and it's not to say that we always have our own homemade soap available. Sometimes we run out, we're too lazy to make more, and we buy soap at the store. We have that option. It's great, but it's the fact that you know how to do it, and then it's easy to have the materials and stuff on hand to make it when you have the time or whatever. Yeah.
Is there any, I guess, final question just for fun, is there any like guilty pleasure or, you know, vestige of the your former fiat lifestyle that you still, you know, can't do without, or every now and then you indulge in some way?
We go out to eat. We go to the restaurant, you know, make sure to go on a date like once a week, you know, and do something. I like to go hang out at the brewery and eat out at a restaurant and be served food and not have to cook and not have to worry about it.
Doesn't sound too fiat to me. That's just a nice way to.
I'm trying to think of, I guess, like maybe a better example is like what could we be doing that we just say it makes more sense for us to just like, we're not the best at recycling, you know. I'll throw some crap in the trash and just take it down to the end of the driveway and let it go in a hole in the ground. Like I tried doing that for a while, like being responsible for all my trash and having every single jar and plastic container that we used sorted and stashed away somewhere, and try to figure out a way to use it instead of throwing it away. And then you get piles of trash all over your house and you're like, well, I guess I just got to throw this crap away and get it out of my hair.
Yeah.
I mean, I think trash is a very fiat idea, like that you could just take a bin down to the end of the road and it just let somebody else deal with it and throw it in a hole somewhere. It's like, but
yeah, I mean, hopefully in the future, it's still great to I mean, with all this stuff, I know we speak in fairly radical or idealistic terms oftentimes, but like, of course, people want to have that degree of convenience. It would just be better if the provider on the other end of that action did something better with the trash rather than throw it in a hole, and you had the capability and the willingness to pay for them to do that. You know,
right.
That's what I don't want to really deal with recycling and all that kind of shit, you know, in my house, but I very much would be willing to pay for, you know, a service provider that would dispose of my garbage in a more sustainable or more quote unquote environmentally friendly way, you know. And I think when regulations come down and when people have more capability to make these types of choices because they're more financially secure, because they're more financially free, as we were saying, then I think they'll be able to make those choices and they'll want to make them. But part of the insidious way in which, you know, this hyper fiat, hyper status sort of culture in which we live in today has relieved people of moral development is in part, I think, all those different actions that have all of our actions ultimately have a morality imbued in them, but the ones that are maybe a little bit more obvious, where there's more responsibility or more sacrifice or what have you involved, we've been mandated to act and perform in a certain way. So we're totally relieved from even having to confront the decision of how to engage in those actions. And as a result, whereas normally the interplay and being confronted with those decisions fosters a moral development, if, you know, even if it's over time or if it's slowly or whatever, but you're confronted with having to make your own decisions. So many of those we've just been relieved of them via regulation or, you know, or mandated behaviors of various kinds, or even cultural norms, of course. But those are, you know, maybe we can be less critical of those because they're not necessarily imposed on us by other people. But, you know, I don't know what my point was there, but I think, you know, that's been part of the landscape that's been generated as a result of this, you know, crazy fiat, enormous government system that we're in, is that all these little decisions that little by little foster, you know, your own development, you know, moral and otherwise, to say like, who are you and what decisions you want to make and what responsibility are you going to take for the impact of your decisions. They get made for you. And as a result, the refinement and development that comes with making them is lost.
Yeah, that, I mean, and that's like the fiat subsidy, right? And people are, their decisions are subsidized where they can afford to not have to consider, what am I going to do with this glass jar or whatever it might be. And yeah, and that's why homesteading, I think it just makes, like, if you can reduce your cost of living by making your own stuff, like, not only are you producing a high quality product for yourself, it's gratifying to do that. It makes financial sense too. Like, that's all, it's way more cost effective to make your own soap, even though it might seem like a small, like, how much money does everyone spend in a year on soap? I don't know, but I certainly spend hardly anything because I make it myself, and it's great freaking soap, you know. And it's like, now and if you apply those little changes in as many aspects of your life as possible, all of a sudden you're like doing everything yourself. You spend hardly any money on your basic living, and then you've got all this extra dough to, you know, go to the restaurant and not worry about it.
And you know that you made those decisions, you know, and I think there's both an empowering component to that and a confrontation with responsibility component to that, because, you know, like, I intentionally and I consciously decided to do this thing this way, to make my own soap, to grow this, to do that. Like, I wasn't removed from the outcome of any of this stuff. I've injected myself into the outcome of all this. And so in those outcomes is my responsibility, and is my character, and is my decision-making, and are my preferences, and are my morality, and all that kind of stuff. And I think that's a good thing. That is probably the right environment to foster well-integrated, well-adjusted, healthy people. And
yes, like,
I'm grateful to see the return of that.
Like, that's back to the 8 forms of capital. It's like, not only did you make financial sense, but now you've gained a skill set, which is intellectual capital, and then you've made a better connection with your environment. You know, there's just so many, the compounding effects of making those decisions and choosing to live that way are immense. It's like, and it just, like I said, one little thing at a time. It can be overwhelming to think I need to produce all my food tomorrow. Like, we don't produce all of our own food. I mean, granted, like, if shit really hit the fan, we could always just go eat lamb and survive. But that's no one. I don't want to only eat lamb every day. You know, it's like, I just have to buy apples from the grocery store because my apple trees aren't producing yet. And even if they were, I couldn't get apples all year. And so it's great to have the option to go get some. It's just when you're reliant on it, again, back to the point, one step at a time.
Baby steps. Yeah.
Yes. Just what are you interested in trying to learn? You know, figure it out and go for it.
Yeah. Well, man, this has been super interesting for me. I love that this is more and more a part of what's happening with all this, and that Bitcoin is helping to foster and facilitate and make this more interesting and realistic and possible for so many people. And I want to, you know, we'll have to do this conversation again in a year or so and see where things are at and what's going on. Where can people, if you want to direct people anywhere, then, you know, feel free to do so now.
Yeah. Just follow me on Twitter, I guess. I'm at HODLRev. That's it. And I'm going to be trying to post. Now that I have like a real connection, I'm trying to just post everything that I'm kind of doing, throughout the day, just a picture of it and a little description.
And the
So
stuff is up on Airbnb and the farm tour and all that jazz. That information is on Airbnb.
yeah, that's on Airbnb. I mean, if you find me, cool. I'm not really comfortable putting that out there for everyone. But because
Sure.
yeah, but yeah, if you find me on Airbnb, come stay. We'd love to have you. We got the yurt, and we can sleep 6 in the house. We're open all year.
Awesome.
I love to give tours if people come by, and yeah, keep an eye out on the Twitter for the classes. I'll be starting with an intro to permaculture class, hopefully by this fall, which will just go into some more of the nitty gritty about the 12 principles and the ethics. And it's going to be obviously heavily weighted with the Bitcoin lens. So
incredible. Well, if I ever find myself up that way, I'm definitely going to hit you up and come for a tour and see what's going on up there. So thanks again for the time, man, and keep in touch. We'll talk again in the future.
yeah, I appreciate it. It was a lot of fun.